welcome to Other Lands Editing Podcast, where two speculative fiction writers and editors help you craft fantastical worlds by keeping an eye on exacting editing and foundational writing principles. Every 2 weeks, we bring you interviews with other writers, advice on editing and writers' craft pitfalls, and reviews of popular media to help you grow. So sit back, relax, and join Margaret Bates and Midnight Voss as we discuss all things writing and editing. For today's episode, we will be talking with author Don Dugle about issues with the book bans or the proposed book ban legislation in Oklahoma. So we have some information for you all if you want to get involved. If you want to, after listening to this episode, reach out to Dusty Devers, one of the sponsors' offices, politely. His number is 405 521 5567. Again, if you'd like to contact Dusty Devers' legislative office directly, it's 405 521 5567. If you want to contact your local legislature, your local government in your state, don't know how to start, there is a website through the federal Congress that can help you find resources to contact your local state legislators. That is congress.gov/state hyphen legislature hyphen websites. Again, go to congress.gov/state hyphen legislature hyphen websites. Also, today we talk about book banning and talk about book bans as reactions to trying to limit the teaching of accurate American history. So, as sort of a trigger warning, we'll be mentioning issues like the history of slavery in the United States and abuse against enslaved peoples, as well as issues about Native American genocide and Japanese internment camps during World War II. So if you need to sit this one out, totally understandable. Now, on with the show. Hi, welcome to the Other Lands Editing Podcast today. You're speaking with Midnight and Margaret, and we have a special guest today with us with Dawn Dugle. Please introduce yourself, Miss Dugle.
Hi, my name is Dawn Dugle, and I write hot romance with sass. All of my couples in my romance books are over the age of 35 because I believe women of a certain age deserve happy endings and happy ever afters. And if you laugh at that joke, you might actually like my books.
Well, that's great. So, how did you originally, as far as your background goes, get started writing romance? Was wanting to see the happy endings that you wanted to out there, but how did you get more involved in that particular community?
So I actually was a journalist for 3 decades. I started my journalism career 33 years ago. Clearly, I was a child when that happened. And I have covered all kinds of local and national stories and court cases and terrible events and weather and all that stuff. And I got to a point in my 40s where I thought, I'm tired of telling all of the stories that are just like the worst that human beings do to each other. That's all that news really is at some point. And I thought, I want to write some things that'll make people laugh and give them some hope and happy endings and all the things that we deserve in life. When I went to college, I was 17 when I went to college, and some very well-meaning people who were related to me, I'm not going to name them, but they know who they are, told me I wanted to write books. And they told me you'd never make any money as an author. So I became a journalist, and I'm here to tell you, don't make any money as a journalist either. So I reached that point in my 40s. I was like, what's stopping me? We were in the middle of a pandemic. I always said if I had the time, I would write a book. And I'm like, well, I got all the time in the world because everything's locked down. So I wrote one book and put a cliffhanger in a romance book, which you don't do, but it worked for this series. Ended up writing 6 books in that series.
Oh, wow.
Then it spun off 4 other books, which then spun off. I'll be releasing book 5 in the 3rd series the end of this month. February, and I have other things that are written under other pen names. And so in all told, I have 30 books out there most of them are romance. And honestly, once I started going, I just like, why not? Like, there's nothing stopping. Who am I waiting for permission for? Let me give myself permission to do this. And I think it also came with the age. After the age of 40, you just have zero F's left to give. And it's like, whatever. And I'm like, let them come for me. What are you going to do? What are you going to say? So, and I didn't see a lot of romance books out there for older women. And a lot of the 40 something romances that I saw or I read, the women were really bitter. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? I don't know a 40-year-old plus woman who is sitting around wringing her hands and going, oh, I hope somebody comes along and rescues me. I hope I'm the chosen one. No, you know what? We get shit done and we figure it out. That's what you do, whether you're married, single, in a long-term relationship, what have you. We are the women, we are the people that you rely on if there is an emergency, because we figure it out and we fix it and we lead the way. So I was like, you know what? Let me write the book that is of my heart, and we'll see if anybody likes that. And turns out they do, and still do, even 4 years later. The first book came out 4 years ago.
That's a ride.
So
My mother was a reporter, and I remember when I was in college, and this is still 20 years ago, and my partner, my boyfriend at the time, was like, I'm going to go into journalism or law. She's like, don't do that, go to law because you will make no money. So that's been a standard. Midnight, you can
yeah,
ask the next question.
I mean, we've gotten the general age range of your protagonists. Do you have some particular genres that you tend to write in?
it's spicy romantic. Well, the majority of my books are spicy romantic comedies. I do have several that are romantic suspense, but even the romantic suspense have comedy in them, which some readers don't want any comedy in their suspense. They want to be on the edge of their seat. I'm like, you need a little relief after a really heavy scene. You need to lighten it up a little bit. And some of my heroines will bust out a very inappropriate, like, it's like laughing at a funeral, like to relieve the tension. It's a lot like that. So, and yeah, I've laughed at a
Yeah.
funeral before, but to be fair, the person who had passed would have appreciated the laughter because we were telling stories about him.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, it's
that's,
good to have the balance.
yeah, I think you can only have so much of one emotion. It's the guys criticize shows that get too grim dark, and you're like, there's no cathartic
Yes.
release.
Yeah,
It's frustrating.
you need to take a breath. There needs to be a reaction beat. There needs to be a reaction beat to it. I say that like I am some very knowledgeable, write books and be authory, but a lot of the stuff I've learned along the way and self-taught and gone back to my journalism. And wow, I wish I'd have paid more attention in English class roots because commas bedevil me. I am bedeviled by commas. I can never get commas right, but that's fine. I got a program that'll say, hey, here's 7,000 instances where you use commas wrong. Maybe you want to fix them. And I'm like, all right, oh God, okay.
It happens with my sister. She's an attorney, and I'm like, that's still not how commas work, or
That's
semicolons
not
for that matter.
commas work.
So we're here today to talk about the Oklahoma State Senate Bill 593, proposed by Dusty Devers, who's one of your state legislators, and that's his real name?
First of all, he is in Oklahoma. I am in Mississippi. So I
Okay,
want to make sure we're very clear on that. He is not my state senator by any
good.
means. And Dusty Devers is his name. Dusty Devers is a state senator. He's been a state senator in Oklahoma since 2023. He is also a Baptist preacher. And from all that I can tell, he didn't resign that position when he became a state senator. He is actually still a Baptist preacher. And on the Center for Baptist Leadership website, which talks about his background, it talks about how he is, and this is a direct quote, he is the author of Christian Resources on Abolishing Abortion and the Christian View of the Role in Civil Government, which should be concerning to people who aren't in his, not just Oklahoma, but people who are in the rest of the United States, because that is a concerning not separation of church and state.
If anything, it's the opposite of like, how can, and from his perspective, the church invade more into what's supposed to be our separation?
There's a lot of, and again, this is not me coming down on any religion. We have the right to believe whatever we believe, which we're going to talk about the First Amendment. Fun fact, First Amendment isn't just about free speech, it's also about the freedom of religion. And that's what our country was founded on. Yet we have individuals from certain religions who are coming at other religions, what people believe or don't believe, and trying to force their beliefs on the rest of America. And it's like, no, we the people wrote that out in a document 200 and something years, 250, 49 years ago. And I have two copies of it. It's called the Constitution. And it is concerning that the specific organization of Baptist ministers are trying to tell the rest of America that God should be in the government, and they lay out everything about that. And it's like, doesn't matter what I believe, it doesn't matter what you believe. We can't be making these laws that limit the freedom of religion or freedom of expression.
And they're not just limited to romance books at this moment. I mean, this is something that's been building in Oklahoma that they've, as far as teachers go, we know that they've been trying to force the teachers to bring the Bible into the classrooms. And there's been pushback on that. But this is part of, like, as you've been saying, a larger agenda from this particular contingent of Southern Baptist preachers. I think it's important to be specific about that. In Oklahoma and Texas, and I've lived in both of those states and do not live in them now. But yeah, like you're right that this is where this is coming from, and we would want to be concerned because they're not going to be hindered by their borders.
And so, and I think I didn't answer the other part of your question, which talked about the bill itself. Oklahoma, so Dusty Devers, State Senator Dusty Devers in Oklahoma has sponsored, I said authored, I'm not sure he authored it, but he has sponsored the bill so that it's attached to his name. Senate Bill 593, which is on the surface looks like it goes after child sexual assault material or child sexual abuse material, which is called CSAM. People used to call it child pornography, but that implies there's some sort of consent on the child's role, and you cannot consent as a child. So CSAM is what we'll call it. And it sounds like a great plan. Sure, we can all agree CSAM is a terrible thing. We don't want that in anywhere. We want to make sure that we protect kids. However, in the very end of this bill, in the very last paragraph, they talk about also banning. This is not an and, it's not this and that, it's an or. CSAM or things that are deemed obscene materials. And it goes into a long list of things that would be covered and what the definition of obscene, but ultimately it comes back to, and I'll talk about the federal part of this too, but in the bill, it talks about what would be affected, and that is pictures, movies, television shows, books, fan fiction, games, adult magazines, a whole lot of stuff. Like, so if you like your Bridgerton, that would be banned. You like Fourth Wing, that would be banned. ACOTAR, yes. And it's not just books with romance in it, it's books that show any of this stuff. And previously, the federal definition of obscenity had to do with things that weren't necessarily, quote, normal sexual activity in the bedroom or what have you. But this bill would include that as well. So even a slightly open door romance, that would be included. Any romance that's in James Patterson books, included. Game of Thrones definitely would be banned. I haven't seen House of Dragons, but I'm pretty sure if it's the same thing, probably banned too. And it's just a wide-reaching thing. We already have federal laws that cover both of these things. They cover both CSAM and obscenity. So why is this bill in front of Oklahoma? Well, I believe, pretty sure, it's a test case. In states where it's red, conservatives will put forth a bill that goes after whatever their belief is. They think something should be overturned, and they make it into law. And then they have a problem with it, like, oh, I don't know, a spicy romance author. And a spicy romance author, let's just say, might take them to court. And the local courts are like, nah, we're going to side with the state lawmakers on this one. And so the spicy romance author would appeal. And then they go to the higher court and a higher court and a higher court until it goes to Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court's waiting for this. This conservative Supreme Court is waiting to have this case put in front of them, because then that gives them the opportunity to overturn the protections under the First Amendment. And if anybody is out there listening and says, well, that can't happen, 2022, that is exactly what happened with Roe v. Wade. I am in Mississippi. I am right down the street from the Jackson Women's Health Clinic. that took the abortion ban to the Supreme Court, and it got overturned. Roe v. Wade got overturned. I think it was June 24th, 2022. It could be 26th. I don't know. I had a book come out the very day. It was like the same day I had a book release. It was a very memorable day. It was like, I can't talk about books right now. We got to talk. So it's very concerning all the way around.
I would say that's a good point about how they basically use states like Oklahoma or Texas as test kitchens for more sweeping legislation. I know that they had done, and I know in Texas, but also in Louisiana, they had some not anti-porn specifically, but they'd had a rule where you had to register for certain online pornographic sites with a provable government ID. And it got to the point where Pornhub, I think, pulled out of Louisiana, or you'd have to, if you lived there, access it, if you even could through a VPN because of the complications of just that ID law, which wasn't literally banning pornography, but in effect limited the ability for pornographic distributors like Pornhub to even go into those states.
And I'm hearing an interesting thing about this. I made a video talking about this for my romance readers. I did not expect the video to blow up like it did, but the amount of comments and the other things that I'm hearing around the country, it's like there are internet service providers that, whether they are under the law to do so or not, are limiting access to websites that are deemed 18 plus or adult content. I think it's a slippery slope, and I think there's a fine line to between protecting children and cutting out our freedom of speech.
What would you say to people who are still saying we don't need to worry about this?
I've gotten that a lot. That's one of the nicest comments that I've gotten against my video. And people went to shoot the messenger, and they're telling me, why are you worrying? Why are you fear mongering? Why are you talking about this for whatever reason? And I'm like, when do you want to worry about this? When do you think it is appropriate to worry about losing the First Amendment? Because that is what this is. In 2017, John McCain, and I'm going to paraphrase because his quote is on my phone. I don't have it in front of me. But John McCain talked about how Donald Trump had an issue with the media and how it was a war against free speech. And the president at the time and now has a list of things and people that he wants to go after. And the media is right up there. And the media is not just television and news. It is all speech. The first thing, if you are trying to take over a government and try to take over and perform a coup and get rid of the law of the land, the first thing you do is go after free speech. You go after the media, because when you take away personal freedoms after that, no one can talk about it, because then they'll be in jail. As you could tell, I get a little passionate about this, because where do you draw the line? Where do you get upset? When is the appropriate time to worry about this stuff? It is not when that stuff goes to court. It should be before it goes to court. We should shut this down in the state legislature and tell the state of Oklahoma, number one, you're plowing ground that has already been done. There are federal laws covering this. And number two, think about the economic impact this is going to have on your state. I think Oklahoma just passed a whole bunch of stuff to bring film crews to the state to make movies there. Do you think that if you have a ban that is going after certain movies and certain television shows, that they're going to want to make movies in your state? The answer is no. Do you think authors and bookstores are going to want to sell books there? No. I don't need to go to prison for writing a romance book, have a felony.
And I think that was also something, because they had edited the bill in committee. I'd reread the new version. I was like, because he said, it's not as broad as you think, and people are exaggerating. And I read it. It was the same verbiage in some spots about what pornography was, or not just the CSAM. And some of it was stuff like, literally, you cannot show a bare breast or buttock. And we talked about how that would include all of Game of Thrones or Bridgerton, because there's lots of boobs. But even like, a lot of people online had already pointed out, like, Titanic doesn't even have an on-screen sex, like they're in a cart shaking, whatever. But you see her breast because he's drawing her as an erotic thing. Or bare butt made me laugh, because it even made me think of something as mundane as like kind of those animal raunchy stoner dude comedies of the early 2000s. There's definitely a scene where in Old School with Will Ferrell, he just goes streaking. And so that's a bare buttock. Is that now porn?
Yep.
And you would say that sounds like you're exaggerating. But at the same time, you have to wonder, once you create that slippery slope of I saw a butt in that, or that scene described that, or that Wattpad fic had them skinny dipping. All of a sudden, does that become bannable? And then when you also look at what some of the verbiage is, again, it's not just movies or books, which would be appalling enough, but it's literally pamphlets. It's literally writing. They were writing this bill with the idea in mind it was as broad as possible, because if people are saying, well, then I just won't buy books, I'll go to Archive of Our Own, I'll go to Wattpad, you know, I'll go
They're
to
included.
Radish.
They're included. That's included too. And
Yeah.
the other thing that's in this bill that is, it's the WTF part of this bill, and I had to reread it several times. It would make, you can send a naughty picture between a husband and a wife, but boyfriends and girlfriends, boyfriends and boyfriends, girlfriends and girlfriends, if you are not legally married, that would be also considered pornography and obscene. And you would also fall under this thing. And then there are people like, well, how would they know? How would they know? There are a lot of states that are passing bills right now that have bounties in them. In Mississippi, we have a bill, and I should have checked to see where it was today, but there's a bounty on undocumented individuals, $1,000 bounty to bring people in and jail them and prison them for life, no possibility for parole, and the person who turned them in gets $1,000. And we would allow bounty hunters just to roam free in the state to do whatever they want and try to round these individuals up. So does that sound nuts? Yes. Do
Well,
I
you
think that something
see it in
similar would happen in Oklahoma? Yes.
it's like Texas with abortion, and some of the other states
Yeah.
like Florida with the don't say gay laws, where there were bounties on turn in the teacher. Oh, you think your neighbor went and took her daughter to get an abortion, turn in your neighbor. So yeah, that was also worrisome to me when I was reading the bill, of people say, oh, no one's going to know that I have this fic downloaded on my book, or I have this thing on my Audible. But I'm like, if someone doesn't like you, they've been to your house before, they really want that $1,500, and they notice that you've got the Sarah J. Maas collection on your bookshelf, you think they're not going to want to get $1,000 to turn you in for, what is it, even to possessions in that or space? It's like a year in prison and a fine. Do you think you trust your neighbor enough not to
Oh,
do that?
the obscenity is up to 10 years in prison, $100,000 per instance. So let's talk about Fourth Wing, Iron Flame, and Onyx Storm. That's three. All right. That's three instances. Now we're talking about $300,000 fine, up to 30 years in prison. It's ridiculous. And those people who's like, I don't know how I can fight this, I'll just keep my stuff. Half of those individuals are on Facebook groups to talk about spicy romance. I want you to think about this. Meta turned off all of the community. They don't have any fact checkers anymore, but they did settle a lawsuit with Donald Trump. Think about that for a second. If you are talking about spicy books and they target you in Oklahoma, they can absolutely find you on social media that way too. We've got computer hackers who have gotten into the Treasury, who have shut down OSHA and USAID. And I mean, let's think about this. What are they looking for? They're not looking for overspending in the government. If they were, we wouldn't be sending people to the Super Bowl for $20 million. I think the price tag was on that.
And you
They
send
also might hire
accounts.
accountants.
If we really wanted to, like, does anybody remember the movie Dave? When Kevin
Yes.
Kline was the doppelganger for the president, he gets in there and he finds out there's all this overspending, and he brings his accountant friend Charles Grodin in to look and see where the overspending is. And he's like, I couldn't run a business like this. And he's eating a sandwich. It was funny, but not funny, because it's like, why can't we do that? Where's the accountant in this? Where are the people standing up and saying, you know what? Stop trying to attack the most vulnerable among us in the American populace, and maybe focus on what we really can do. And that was one of the other complaints I've heard was, don't you have anything better to worry about? And I'm like,
This is our
there's
livelihood.
so many. What do you want me to worry about? This is my livelihood. And I'm concerned as a former journalist about what this means going forward. The Constitution is a lot like the Bible. I'm totally going there. Constitution is a lot like the Bible. It only has power if we believe in it. It only has power if we follow the rules, right?
Yeah.
So if you've got a leader of the country who has said, yeah, the Constitution, that's just a suggestion, and they do whatever they want, what stops everything else? What stops us from burning the Constitution and getting rid of the First Amendment altogether and all the other protections we're provided as American citizens?
I think that's the
Not
point, that we've
much.
had these guardrails that we thought, because of the Constitution, because of the checks and balances, because of the way the system was designed, would preserve. And people are like, well, it's not going to get that bad. It's not going to get that bad. And I think we've seen these guardrails be eroded. I mean, again, people keep saying it's settled law. Midnight and I are both queer, and people are like, we won't get rid of gay marriage. And I'm thinking, honestly, 9 years ago, when he got elected the first time, I remember the day after I cried in my office at grad school because I knew they were going to get rid of Roe v. Wade. People were like, it's not going to happen. And then, like you said, in 2022, it's exactly what we said would happen. And now people are like, well, they won't get rid of gay marriage. They won't make everything pornography. These are established law. They have thrown out a signal. The Supreme Court does not care what is established law. That's a 6-3 court with some pretty extreme Episcopalians and Catholics on it. And now the law is what they want to say it is.
The other thing, too, going back to Senate Bill 593, the definition of what's obscene, gay relationships are included in that. It's not like monster porn. Like, it's men and women and women, man, like queer, trans, like they're going after all of it. And it's like, get upset about this. Why am I? I'm not the only one upset about it anymore, because I lit a fire under a bunch of readers and book talk. But when we look at what to be concerned about and where we should put our attention, we need to look at what people are doing. It's easy to send out executive orders that may or may not be legal, although we've also seen how our leader in chief has regarded any kind of judicial order. They're like, yeah, that doesn't apply to me. Yes, it does. But they're going to do whatever they want anyway. And you have to look at what the actions are and what they're doing, and putting this kind of bill in front. This is right out of the Project 2025 playbook, which goes after obscenity. They want a nationwide ban on pornography and what they consider pornography, which
means that queer
when
people exist at all because they
we're,
inherently
yeah,
sexualize trans, NB,
yes.
lesbian, bisexual, gay bodies, and just anything in that existence becomes pornography. Like, you love that book Heartstopper, and that series now has these really adorable graphic novels, but hey, that's gay. And sooner or later you could make it under Project 2025, pornography, ban it, arrest the author. That's where we're headed, I
and
feel,
and
as well.
the and the things that are in that project, that 900-page manifesto talking about getting rid of trans, gay, like just women's rights. Okay, maybe you don't know any queer individuals in your life or trans individuals that you think you know of, right? But women are, what, 53% of this country? Seriously, think about that. We have the majority in this country, and yet, and that's another thing we got to look at, is how they're going after and trying to undermine women's power. The birth certificate thing for voting, the Republicans in the executive order that was I forget, I don't know, it all is run together, where you have to have your birth certificate match the name on your driver's license so that you can vote. The intention behind
The
that is
SAVE
to go
Act.
after
Yeah.
trans, right?
Yeah.
But what women fail to mention, even those who are against trans rights, is that affects you too. If you're married, if you haven't changed your birth certificate, now you're not going to be able to vote. You're going to have to rely on your husband to vote. Does he vote the way you want to vote? Maybe they do. I stood in line on voting day and was surrounded by these men who brought their wives. I'm in the deep South. They brought their wives, almost let her out of the house for 20 minutes to come vote and register her vote, and then she can go back and take care of the kids or whatever. And then again, I'm not trying to shit on stay-at-home moms. Like, that's, you do you. If that's what you choose, yes, good. I want you to have the life you choose, but I don't want you to have that life if that's all you have, because all of our rights have been taken away.
Yeah, I
So,
think someone mentioned that there have been, like, the EO to strip essentially trans non-binary people of their ability to get passports because of the complication between social security card name and current passport name. But then there's also this idea that they're trying to press through Congress, the SAVE Act, which would be that for voting and all those restrictions on ID. And I think someone had mentioned there's over 80 to 83% of women in the United States who are married, go by their married name on like their driver's license and more their common IDs that they have on them, which obviously don't match their birth name. So something like that really does impact one's ability to vote. You show up and you're like, oh, I don't have any valid ID, but it's November and I can't do it now. Similarly, I think I saw a vlogger, which is how I found your video because she'd stitched you, and she had mentioned that in a way you could see something like SB 593 as almost a backdoor to also really impacting women's rights to vote. Because if you start reporting, especially people who own romance books or talk about romance as pornography and they get the time in prison, well, if you, a lot of states, if you have become a prisoner, if you've been in jail, you can no longer vote. So it could be a backdoor for that as well.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that until I saw the question that you sent me, and I had to sit with it for a little bit, thinking, no, it's one of those things that it sounds bananas when it's said, but when you really look at what people are doing, again, don't just look at what they've said or what they've written. What are they doing? What are the actions? The actions speak louder than words. I would not be surprised if that would be the case. I mean, I wouldn't be able to vote, but I could become president. So I got that going for me.
Yeah, I think in this day and age, if you're a felon who is not allowed to vote, is ridiculous because a felon with 34 convictions is allowed to be president. But that is also its other debate. But it's just like
Yeah.
it shouldn't affect your ability to get any job if the highest job in the land can have it. But you just start looking at these bills and something like the Save Act, something like House Bill 593. This is what they're doing that's immediately evil, but also you got to think about how does this push forward the Heritage Foundation and the Project 2025 agenda, which is now apparently federal law or trying to be, and how does that also work in pieces and starts to erode at constitutional rights like the ability to vote? Because it all
They've
is kind
tried
of
to
a
put forth
piece.
they tried to put forth the SAVE Act right before the election too, with the forefront of it being we need to shut down illegal voters. And now it's we need to shut down trans voters. And if you look at that and you look at the attempts at book bans over the course of the past year, where the focus was very much again child pornography, they have this thing on the surface, and you guys were talking about it as like this wedge or like this back door. And they have this list of people that they're after. And if you think you're not on that list, you're not right. As that there's a long list. Okay, the Save Act was for this, and now it's for this, but it will also impact a lot of married women. So, oops.
And I think that's also something as a queer writer and as someone who's more involved with more of the marginalized sides of writing, that is frustrating for me because I saw them starting to use cue the Simpsons meme, won't somebody think of the children as a way to in 2022 starting up in midterms and all those book bans that really started in response to quote CRT, whatever they want to make it. And even at this point, 3 years ago, queer authors and BIPOC authors, because they were going very hard after books that were either about Black communities or about Black history. I mean, The Hate You Give, Dear Martin, all those things were also getting banned. Actual books talking about actual history, things that were like biographies of Harriet Tubman, all of a sudden needed to be off school shelves because jerks, to put it bluntly. But the same thing with gender queer and blue is the sorry, all these other ones. Blue
Blue
is
is
the
the
warmest
warmest
color.
color.
Yeah, and I can there's another one that I can't remember off can see the picture of the cover. But all of these
Remember, this
queer
book is
books,
gay is one of those, and it's not.
yeah,
I mean,
totally.
it's not
Blonde
child
Boy. There's so
pornography anyway.
many of these ones that are gay or about being trans and or gay or just whatever started with them. And 3 years ago, especially queer and BIPOC and Black authors were saying, we are the canaries in the coal mine. Please help us. And we tried to do what we could to protect ourselves and protect our own from these book bans. It's progressing. Now you're getting to the point where it's, hey, there's a bare butt in your book that's porn. And it could have been completely just you were not even writing a romance. You could be an author who's writing a joke about some dude skinny dipping, and all of a sudden you wrote porn. It's definitely moving the goalpost, and it's been moving the goalpost pretty fast over 3 years.
And it's you don't cook lobster by putting them in a hot pot. You put them in a cold pot and then you turn up the heat and then they don't climb out because they don't realize they're being cooked alive until it's too late. And so, back to that question of when do we worry about this? The time to worry about this is right now. And I also have raised the red flag about it's like there is a lot There is a dumpster fire going on in Washington, D.C. right now. I don't know how else to describe it. It is a hot mess express.
It's a coup.
But if I'm a state lawmaker who wants to get my agenda passed, and I'm not just talking about Oklahoma, I'm talking about all 50 states and territories, then I would use this distraction to put stuff through in the state legislatures. So it is so important to, I heard a lot of women, especially women, trans, gay, queer, women of color, people of color, talking about how they didn't feel like their vote really counted on election day in 2024. Like, we did the best we could, but still here we are. And to that, I say your vote is also important to local elections. The people who represent you in Congress, the people who represent you at the state level. I had a journalist mentor tell me one time that local elections affect your wallet and federal elections affect your personal freedoms and things like that. They go together. How your local municipality spends your money, how your state spends your money, what they're focusing on, like this is the time to pay attention. Because if I'm up to no good and I'm trying to pass out this nonsense that, by the way, has already been decided as federal law, which affects the states, I'm going to try to pass this stuff in and get it up to the Supreme Court so they can overturn these laws. That's what I would do. I'm
So
afraid that's what they're doing.
by design, I mean, they've said basically they're adopting, and Midnight can talk more to this, but like the shock doctrine, except for our own political system. There's this idea that they're going to blitzkrieg us and there's 500 things that happen a day. So at the federal level, it's hard to pay attention, but you're right. It's a prime time for people who are so upset about the federal to ignore what can be snuck in through the states.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for listeners who are not familiar with the shock doctrine are probably familiar right now with what they're calling flooding the zone. But it's the same idea that they borrowed from people who were electroshocking their patients in like the 60s and 70s and finding out you can disorient someone enough and they feel like they can bring them back and then rebuild them better. They've used that general theory economically, test drove it in Chile to disastrous effect in other places. But when they use this, the goal is to overwhelm and disorient the population enough so that they will accept policies that otherwise would have been wildly unpopular. Usually they have to wait for some kind of national disaster for that to happen. Easier to
Trump is
do
the
now that we're
disaster.
in late stage capitalism with the climate collapsing and suddenly California's on fire or there's a catastrophic century level hurricane or two, but can also be in the fact that someone is flagrantly violating our Constitution on a daily basis multiple times, and we're so overwhelmed that we're not paying attention to other things. So people are so disoriented, like Dawn was saying, they can get there on the state level and say, we've been wanting to pass this, let's go for it right now.
One of the things that really shocked me this week, and I had one of my Canadian author friends, she texted me one morning and she said, "Did you know Donald Trump wants to invade Canada?" And I laughed and I
He does.
immediately FaceTimed her. I'm like, what are you talking about? And she flipped the camera around and she's showing me the media in Canada and what they're talking about. And I said, I have not even heard that. Like, this, I haven't even heard this.
He
And so
doubled down on that in his pre-Super
he,
Bowl
in the
interview
Super
on
Bowl,
Sunday.
right?
Yeah.
And one of the things I said to her was, I was like, you know what? There has never been a time in my 51 and a half years on this planet where I thought to myself, you know what we should do? You know what would make our lives better? We should invade Canada. We should make Canada the 51st state. I said, that is not something anybody has ever campaigned on. We've never talked about it at a federal level. There's never been any discussion. Today, as we're talking about this, I'm like, oh, okay, that's another one of those distractions. Does he really want to go to Canada? Probably not. Does he want to get attention off of what he's doing, violating civil liberties and privacy law? I would think so. Yeah. So
Well, also
it's,
it's used to be, and Midnight and I are millennials, so we're of age where we were like teenagers or middle schoolers when the South Park film came out in like theaters. But it used to be that the idea of invading Canada was so hyperbolically ridiculous that they made literally a whole South Park movie about it and an Oscar nominated song called Blame Canada. But now it's not funny because he's at least doing an economic tariff war on it of 25% on their aluminum and
Yes.
steel imports that he announced this weekend. But he keeps saying we want it to be the 51st state. He keeps insulting their outgoing prime minister. Like eventually Canadians are going to be like shutting the border, which I never thought would happen. When there wasn't a pandemic, that Canada would have to lock down its border with us. But that might actually end up being something that happens. And
The
again, that's
it
with the shock doctrine. It just keeps coming.
Yeah.
I will say Canadian leaders and Canadian military are taking this very seriously,
They should.
and they are ramping up their military. And if we think that this it sounds like a joke, I know all the late night talk show hosts have turned it into a punchline, but it's like, and that's what my friend was saying to me. She's like, how it's like a media blackout on this. Your comedians are joking about it, and we've got people being called up in the military. And I said, okay, yes, that does sound very serious, not something that any of us in America want. And this tariff thing, it's like, who do you think pays for that? Who is going to pay for those
Oh,
tariffs?
Canada
It
pays for it. China pays for it. Drives me
no,
nuts.
it's
And
like,
I
use your head, people. We've got groceries, we've got the price of everything that has gone up. We are in, if they haven't called it inflation, it looks like inflation, having lived through one of those previously. And the biggest, one of the biggest things of inflation came in 1930s Germany, where people couldn't buy groceries for their family, they couldn't get jobs. And so normal, thoughtful individuals voted a certain mustache man into power, and which led to a complete freaking genocide of 6 million people. At what point a takeover of a country doesn't look like a highlight reel on National Geographic or the History Channel or a paragraph in a history book. It is the day-to-day slight erosion of rights, of silencing voices, silencing people who differ with you or have differing opinions or come from a different way of life than the way you grew up. That is how people take over a country. That is how a coup happens. It is not tanks rolling down the middle of the street. It's
yeah.
not goose stepping. It starts when people are fed up with prices and they're willing. I think, Margaret, you said it, where you're willing to vote for something that you probably wouldn't any other normal time, but you think maybe this will lead to making it better. And it hasn't.
And I think people point out that, like, this is not me being flippant, but there's a reason it was called in Germany the final solution because there was a whole pathway of laws to ghettoize the Jewish population, Kristallnacht to destroy their businesses and to destroy their livelihoods, laws seizing family property in gold and possessions that have never been returned to those survivors. And it comes by steps. I mean, we're literally talking about book banning. And one of the first things they did with the Nazi Party was to go to the Sexology Institute that had the most extensive research about transgender individuals, about different sexual identities, different genders. That was research that had been started and really fomented under the intellectuals and the research capacities in the 1920s and early 1930s Germany, and they burned it. And that has had echoing repercussions for almost 90 years for two reasons. A, because it's horrible, but it was one of those starts. And of course, there were more than, I mean, there were gay people who were considered like sexual deviants in the camps as well. But also, people in the last 10 years have been like, well, transgender people never existed before. Transgender people don't exist. There's no non-binary. There's none of this. This has never happened. This is something that just came up new because we indoctrinated our children. And I'm like, because 90 years
No,
ago, some of the most seminal works about sexology were burned by freaking Nazis. And now we're seeing them do it again, at least in a legal method of you can't read All Boys Are Blue. You can't read genderqueer. You can't write these books. It's a different way to get the mechanism done, but it's still going to effectively ban them.
And they have
and
already been in classrooms trying to change the history books and making sure that they have the right history or like the both sides history of slavery, if you're talking about Texas. So like they're already in the history books rewriting things so that when people are, let's say we survive this and in 30 years people are looking back, then once again, everyone with their starfish memories are going to be like, this thing just happened. Where do these people come from? We've always been here. You just keep burning our history.
And I wanted to clarify for listeners, we're three white women. But I want to point out that when you were talking about people trying to change curriculum, there's been a lot of pushback because of anti-CRT, which just means anti anybody who's not a cishet white WASP voice, saying that you shouldn't teach AP African American history, and a lot of different
Yeah,
states being like, we're not going to teach it, we are going to teach it. Oh, we're not going to fund it. Oh, we shouldn't have that. And so that pushback has caused at least certain states. I know Georgia was one of them for at least for a while, but there have been others to be like, we
Georgia and
can't offer
Florida.
AP African, yeah, AP African American history. What is more rewriting history than that?
They're refusing to teach that history. They're refusing to teach any history that they feel makes the white race look bad. So it's a complete refusal of the reality of this country, and at the same time taking out the tensions that make history worth learning. So then it's boring and then students don't pay attention to it anyway. I guess both ways serve their purposes because they don't want the electorate to really remember what this country is about and how it's created.
And it's
And
not
this
like
should
we
come
teach it that
this
well to begin with. Like, not to be like
yeah,
sarcastic, but
right.
it's an escalation. I'm 40 years old. I did not realize, I knew I had heard in AP American history 25 years back, we'd had the Chinese Exclusion Act, but I had, buried it, not buried it, but like a lot of other stuff happened in the interim when all their types of education I pursued. I didn't do a lot of history in college. I had to actually literally work for an immigration office and go through their training to realize that in the United States, some types of Asian Americans, including Chinese Americans, weren't allowed to have full citizenship and voting rights till 1943. And they just don't teach me that. Or I'm amazed by the amount of people who, even in my generation, were unaware of what poor George Takai has spent his life trying to remind people of, which was the internment of the Japanese Americans by similar laws
Yes.
and ideas that they're using to reopen Gitmo and to send people to Venezuela in that super max prison. And he spent his whole life, he wrote a play, Allegiance, about it, trying to be like, this also happened here. This also affected me. I was literally a child in this situation. And I felt lucky because at my particular middle school, my history teacher was very adamant about teaching that side of World War II. And we watched a whole movie about it. But a lot of people in my generation didn't even know it. And now we're at the stage of, we weren't teaching it great, but now we're literally trying to ban these aspects of Native American genocide, of civil rights, of people being enslaved. Like, didn't just happen, all that kind of stuff, and just pretending you're right, midnight, that it's just, it was always great. Here's our jingoistic history. Nothing to see here. Too boring. Move along.
The thing that really should I mean it's there's so many red flags, it's like where to start. But one thing that the parallels between 1930s Germany and today is the you discover a problem for the populace and you say these people are to blame for it. You point out this is why your eggs are so expensive. I'm like, eggs are expensive because we've got this bird flu epidemic and
The CDC can't even
CDC
follow it.
isn't able to talk about it. And so we've got people who are getting these down low memos to be able to put out there and say, hey, by the way, did you know this bird flu will kill cats? And it's jumping from cats to humans. We've targeted, certain members of our leadership have targeted a group of people that they blame for everything. Oh my God, trans people just want to live their truth. Okay, they just want to live their truth. What does it affect you? I can tell you right now, I have never, ever worried for my safety being in the presence of a trans woman or a trans man.
Yeah.
I
And I think,
have crossed the street at night when a single white guy is walking across the street and giving me the eyeball.
or that
Or
nervousness in a underground parking garage at night, which I try to avoid, but
underground parking
we all know
garage.
that feeling.
I've had my drinks drugged twice, not by trans individuals, not by gay individuals, and not even by anybody of color. It was a white guy who did it. Okay. So we can make all the jokes we want about choosing the bear, but it's like there's a reason. There's a reason that got really popular. We're pointing to people, we're trying to again distract from the message of who really is.
And I
Hey,
think that they,
DT had some of these policies enacted during his first presidency that have repercussions now, and he's acting like he had nothing to do with it. And it's like,
yeah, and I think that they give away the game a bit with how much they've made trans individuals a scapegoat, because they always frame it as trans women are predatory. And if they mention trans men or, NB men at all, it's in the framework of these are confused girls who've been indoctrinated and been tricked into giving up or doing hormone therapy so they can no longer have children. And it's very much of a piece where the clamp down on trans rights and the ability to freely transition your body and be who you want to be and who you are is also coming up as a war. At the same time, they are trying to have a war against abortion. And that's a lot of that Christo-fascist sentiment of we need, and it was in the ruling on Roe v. Wade of we need to have, I think it was Alito who's like, we need to have more babies. And it was more like more women available for more American born babies. I did also like to point out that the other group that's come up has been immigrants, not necessarily in the literary or
Yes,
like for the children censoring
yes.
sense, but the two groups that they've started with are two of the most vulnerable, which is always how fascist regimes go. They pick out the ones that they can scapegoat and make other people afraid of as the other, and the ones who have the least political power. So the other ones have been the immigrant groups, which more far afield, but it frustrates me as someone who's worked in immigration and has also worked in social services helping immigrants because every time they go, well, they're illegally on Social Security, they're illegally getting Medicaid. I'm like, half the people I was helping at different hospitals just trying to get their emergency room bills forgiven wish they could have applied for Medicaid. Like all the misinformation and the lies to make people hate, especially the trans community and especially the immigrant community, is very 1930s Germany. It's very much that fascist playbook, and it's horrible.
I mean, we've got an executive order out there that if you're in this country illegally, whether you've done anything wrong or any crime or not, the crime is just you being in a different place. You can be, I mean, according to the executive order, you can be sent to Guantanamo Bay, which is 90 miles off the coast. Nobody has access to see what goes on in there. And I'm like, you don't think that's a concentration? Like that's how the concentration camp started. And when we had unelected dude bros go into Homeland Security and Treasury and all these places,
FAFSA, because when you apply for
FAFSA,
FAFSA, you have to list if your status.
it's like, why is nobody talking about the fact that, yeah, they can find out personal information about their quote enemies or whatever they're doing in there, but they can also delete people's identities, delete the fact that they are American citizens who may look different than you and me. And so when the time comes
If it
and they
makes you
go
feel
to
any better,
take them,
by federal law, all immigration information has to be stored as a paper copy for 99 years. And I'm being literal because I used to work for immigration. It's all in a giant ass cave and holding facility in the center of the United States in a state I will not name. So it's like Ark of the Covenant from Indiana Jones in there, and there's a 99 years worth of
Let them get the
literal
AI
phone
on
book
that.
size federal file. Yeah, you fix that. So I'm glad that they were smart enough in that time when they made those laws and around the 1940s when the INS sort of became established and they started really formalizing. I think it's 1950 when they started formalizing those laws. So yeah, there's literal physical copies. So go after those too. But I know we've wrapped around a lot, but I
yeah.
think this gets me back to the idea that sometimes you said that you've had pushback to you when you come up with these videos first informing about 593, but it also takes me back to honestly around the time of the election, and a lot of people who were on Book Talk, who are on Bookstagram within the book blogger, the book reader writer community saying books aren't political. I just want to read. I just want to read romance. I don't want to think about marginalized people who are suffering first, essentially. What do you say, or either you, Midnight or Dawn, to the idea that books aren't political, that writing isn't political?
I don't have coherent thoughts on this. I just don't know how like there are things that you write for fun, but then things will flow into it as theme develops as you write it. So as you're in a project, you may not know, oh, this is all about trauma, and it will get in there. And so it's hard to separate politics from art because so much of art is commentary on life. If you have something that's completely separated from life, then it's going to be hard for people to relate to. It's going to be very abstract. I don't know how you would do that for starters. And then secondly, it just seems like a weird take of totally thinking that they can have their entertainment completely divorced what's going on. And then secondly, okay, here's my second point of if you think it doesn't affect you, then look at how they've strategized prior, is that they've got the immigrants and the trans people as individuals that they think either people can hate or will not fight for. And then they're coming after your little romance books where people are either going to not know what is going on, Or they may think, who cares about romance
They
books?
may just
And
laugh
then
at soccer
suddenly they
mom
don't have
books.
any of their, yeah. So yeah, maybe a little bit.
So I did a video this week talking about my books aren't just romance. I mean, Midnight hit it on the head. I have every book that I write has a strong woman character of a certain age, which, by the way, when you become a certain age as a woman, you become invisible. And I wanted to write the story of my heart, which is that these strong women deserve choices. They deserve to pick what their life looks like. And they deserve a man or a partner that respects them for who they are. All right. Who doesn't want that? Right. A lot of the women in my books, it may be romantic comedy, but they're also fighting the patriarchy. If you really read into what I write, there should be no surprise that I'm upset about some of the stuff. We got to fight back from this stuff. This is ridiculous. When there was a big divide about books and politics, and what I was seeing on Book Talk was that some readers and even some authors wanted it to be all or nothing. It had to be, you have to do this. You should do that. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm Gen X. I don't like to be told what to do. Plus, I wanted to respect your right to choose whatever that is. Choose how you live your life, choose your body autonomy, and choose who you vote for. We may not agree on everything, but hey, you choose. That's your right. It's also my right. And I don't like people telling me it has to be this, it must be that. But the reality is that books are political. Oklahoma Senate Bill 593, in that bill, it talks about what a quote normal human being considers obscene. And to that I say, who is normal?
Dusty
Who
Evers,
is this?
again, somehow real name.
Who is this normal person? Is this a committee of normality? Who chooses? How are we going to vet these individuals and let them determine and put their morality on somebody else? We have gotten to a point where it's so divisive, even in the romance community. I don't even remember how long ago it was. There's a book publisher who came out and said, we're against smut.
It's only been in the last couple weeks I saw it in the lady, whatever sort of Substack saying about it. There was a sweet romance whose big selling point for their advertising campaign was going to be like, we don't sell smut. And I was like, oh no, which by the way, cabling for some other day, but the fact that they have still the persistent label of it's clean romance versus dirty romance really drives me
Yeah.
nuts because of the way clean as connotation for sex has been very debilitating, especially to the queer community in the 90s when the AIDS epidemic was higher. And anyway, I just don't think
Yes.
that should happen. But trying to advertise yourself on we're not the smutty ones when bills like 593 are coming for pretty much any type of romance. If you read things broadly enough, it's like maybe you close the door, but eventually they'll find a workaround so you women can't be reading books and having thoughts. Let's be honest with
Right.
ourselves. They keep moving the goalpost in just 3 years.
And well, first of all, the logo that came with that, I'm like, y'all should have run that past a bunch of smutty romance authors because it looks spicy to me, but whatever, it's fine. That's just my smart ass brain talking there. On all seriousness, we need to be united on this now more than ever. It cannot be a divide between closed door, open door, medium door, on the page, off the page,
I
no
only write
F
het.
words,
I
all that.
don't write queer, etc.
It's like if you really want people to enjoy romance novels, to enjoy reading, period, we've got to be united on this, that all reading is valid, that I'm not going to yuck your yum. You do you. There's some things out there, like I have great friends in the author community who write stuff that is not my jam. It's not for me, but I support them in their right to do it. And I love their enthusiasm for it. And they're experts in this genre. Why do we have to have a divide between these things? I'll tell you why. It's because if we're fighting amongst ourselves, we're not fighting the people who are trying to keep us down, who are trying to ban what we do for a living. Romance novels are mostly written by women. And if you make that a crime, you take away the economic freedom of a woman to choose how she spends her time, how she makes her money, and what she spends her money on.
I've been doing research. I went back to school, so my program's in professional writing, and my first semester was doing research in romance novels and what values drive reader purchase behavior. But even on some of the data I found as recently as 2019, because the RWA stats from 2019, where it's like still about 84% female identifying as pet readers, and it's a 1.2 or $3 billion a year industry from 6 years ago. I mean, things may have changed or vacillated.
Hmm.
I don't know how much with the rebound in print mortar bookstores it's gone up. But yeah, you're right. Economically, that's cutting people, especially women, out under the knees if you take that as an industry and an option away from us. I will say that also politically, what I think about, and this also comes from another class I'm taking in teaching composition this semester, is that the ability of who gets platformed and who gets the ability to tell a narrative and have it believed is in itself political. Like, even before this bullshit from the fascist and from this coup and from Donald Trump and Project 2025, even before that, in publishing, it was like, well, what made money? And then it would be, well, we'll platform sort of whatever sells in Nebraska or whatever sells in the Midwest, i.e., usually cishet love stories, more often white stories. More often, maybe you will have one or two marginalized off to be our representative of that particular genre of fiction or that trend. I'm making the air quotes as I speak. But again, it is inherently political which stories get platforms, which stories get promoted, and which stories get bought. And that is baked into it both as a capitalist industry, and it's baked into it now when there's the political ramifications of we don't even want these people to exist. We don't want to show healthy sexuality if people aren't married and doing it for reproductive purposes to make more babies. We don't want to show it if it shows queer joy or black joy or joy for BIPOC characters having their own power in their narratives. And that is also very political, and it always has been.
And the big, for a woman, myself, I'm pointing to myself, I'll speak to myself as a woman over 50 who is not having babies, haven't had babies, not going to have babies, too old to have them now. We had the going out of business sale on my reproductive organs. So it's
Same.
like when JD Vance says we want more babies, when they talk about more babies and we have to have babies and babies, 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 because we need more babies to be workers in the factories of the billionaire friends of the president, but that's a whole other thing altogether. It's like, what are you going to do about women over 50? What are you going to do about, does that mean that I am no
The
longer valid?
babysitters? I don't know.
Am I a
I don't
babysitter?
know.
Am I the nanny? Am I the, what were those people in the Handmaid's Tale who kept all the breeders in line? Am I
Lydia.
the, yeah, am I the Aunt Lydia? Like,
No,
what is
because
that?
we're going to go to the colonies. I mean, the Aunt Lydias are the collaborators who are too old to be wives.
Yes.
So we're just going to get yeeted out of here, and the people who are collaborating get to shut up and stand behind the men. And
Yeah.
that's not going to work out as well as they
The
want to if their career is running their mouth about how women shouldn't have rights.
the parable of the talents by Octavia Butler is should be required reading of everybody in America. I tell you, when I tell you I had anxiety and nightmares for a week after reading that, I don't even think I can do it justice. This book was published in 1998, and it is about, for those of you who have not read it, it's part two of the Earthseed series. I recommend both books highly, but in Parable of the Talents, it is a look at the sort of the after effects of the dystopian society. And a president by the name of Jarrett goes in, gets elected under the platform of, quote, make America great again, end quote. Okay, are you chilled yet? Wait for it. His minions go out into the world and decide to enslave or burn or do all sorts of despicable things to people that they consider enemies of the state. And that includes different religions, different sexualities, women, the media. They take children away from families who are in this and just disappear them. Like, it is unfreaking believable how close to what we are going through is. And it is freaking chilling. And it doesn't get much better. It's a really depressing book
Where I get to
because
brag
of
on
what,
Midnight because she teaches composition. And so she chose in the semester previously to base her deep reading around Parable of the Sower. So I keep thinking that after everything happened in November and where we are now, all of her students are like, she's a psychic. I was like, I
She
wish
is
we'd
a
play the lottery and have money, but
sage.
just
They
having
were
their
having the
exposure.
hurricanes while we were in the middle of talking about the shock doctrine. Of like, it was not something that I planned. And now this semester, we're in the middle of trying to talk about ethics and empathy. And there are orders coming down that we're not allowed to have DEI. And one of my students says, am I allowed to talk about race in this story? And I'm like, they can come take these readings from my hands. It doesn't matter. They can see, like, students can see this, but just so happen the ones that I was picking are on the money for what's happening. It's very
Well,
but
also
I
the
bet
time
my
like those these
students
kind
from
of
last
despotic
semester are like,
jerks never go out of
wow, this is
business.
weird.
Yeah.
Midnight's given me an A for my essay today. I appreciate it.
Yes. Yeah.
But
A plus.
it should be required reading.
I will also say that I have many jobs because as a grad student, you got to keep yourself afloat. But I work for an independent bookstore and I'm a bookseller. And we have an uptick in people buying dystopian fiction. And we have Handmaid's Tale and Parable of the Sower get requested the most because we often order out from our distributor to get them in the house.
Mhm.
But I had a boy who last week, he's like 13 or 14, came in with his dad and they were looking for A Brave New World. And I was holding it to him. I was like, oh, are you reading it for a school project? And his dad's no, he just really wanted to read it right now. Last time I worked with Sunday and I sold someone a comic version of, I want to say it was 1984. I've got to actually go to my store and be like, we have to actually reorder 84 and Brave New World. And I think we don't have Handmaid's Tale or Parable of the Sower left on the shelves right now. And I
Fahrenheit
also will say
451.
yeah, that one we still have. We still have a comic version of that.
Yeah.
I will say that we also sell a lot. One of our most requested books, and I've only been there for 6 weeks, but the most requested book we have to order out for is Snyder's On Tyranny, which is a nonfiction book that's talking about how when you're in the middle of a coup of a despotic regime, what you do to try and resist as best you can. I think when you were talking earlier, you might have mentioned it, if not exactly by name, but one of the things you don't do, rule number one is you don't comply. You don't cede power before they actually try, like Minette was saying, wrest it from you. And we see all these big social media companies being like, I really want money. I really want them to rule. I see you, Mark Zuckerberg, favorably in my antitrust cases so I can keep being like a monolith. And you see that from Google, who I think just yesterday said we're not going to put Pride Month or Black History Month on our Google Calendar anymore as an option because, quote, it's getting too many and they're too complicated. Like you see these big tech companies being money, money, money and seeding in advance. But at the same level, if you're a reader, if you're a writer, if you're just someone who's super passionate about books and writing, don't seed in advance. Go out and buy banned books. Help talk about what's going on in Oklahoma. Call your representatives if you're in one of these states and say, I don't want this, which I guess loops me around to Don, what do you think? You're also not in Oklahoma yourself, but like, what do you think are the best things people who might be in Oklahoma could do to slow down SB 593 and hopefully defeat it? And what do you think people who are outside of that state who might be, I mean, I live in a blue state, I live in Maryland, say like, it's probably not going to get to me, or that's just Oklahoma. Like, what can we do now to kill this in the crib? And I mean, that as literally as possible.
I think, well, first of all, you don't have to be in Oklahoma to complain about a bill in Oklahoma. I mean, you have a right to free speech as of today. You have a right to register a complaint. And I think that the more people flood the phone lines, like I know a lot of people don't like to call anybody, but pick up the phone, let them hear your voice, tell them there's a couple of things. Number one, if they really want to go after CSAM and they want to make a stricter ban, fantastic. Separate that out and make it its only bill. Make that the only thing. They should not be able to lump things together. That's how TikTok's ban has ended up getting passed. By the way, it's still going to go into effect. We've only got a 90-day reprieve on that. So call Oklahoma and say, listen, separate this out. Make it two bills if you really feel compelled to do that. But the other part of this is already federal law. This is already decided. You don't need to be wasting your legislative time. There's no bigger issues in Oklahoma right now. Y'all can't be talking about. I think Oklahoma has also, I think Dusty Devers actually sponsored a bill that is trying to get rid of no fault divorce. I have to
Sounds
check
like
into
something
that.
he would do.
Yeah. And there's other states that have gone after that where you have to prove that there's a reason you don't want to be married to your husband anymore and when I was thinking about the birth certificate thing, that also affects women who have fled a domestic violence situation and they've changed their names, and just something to be concerned about. But if you are not in Oklahoma, the not only call Oklahoma's state legislature and the state Senate, but also call your own legislators and your own representatives and say, look, I'm looking at what's going on in Oklahoma. I'm telling you right now, I do not want this to happen in our state, and tell them why. This is $1 billion industry that you're crippling authors and readers and turning this into a surveillance state where neighbors
People can
turn
turn each other
neighbors
in.
against neighbors. It's like, which really is super funny to me, because I think State Senator Dusty Devers created a book called Love Thy Neighbor. I'm like, yeah, it's in the Bible, and we should love thy neighbor, no matter who or what they're doing. There wasn't an asterisk in the big book. It was love thy neighbor as thyself. And this bill is not that. So I think we also need to separate church from state. It gets very murky, but we don't have a lot of good examples at the top. So we need to set those good examples in our states, because again, we the people, we're 300 million people. We're 300 million people.
There is more of
They
us than
are,
there are
there are more of
staunch
us than there are
fascists.
of them. And we have to be loud. We have to get in their face. There was a great video about a woman went after the Democrats who were standing outside the Department of Education and were stopped by one guy. There were 20 people standing trying to get into the Department of Education, which is a public access building. And this one guy has stopped them. And it's like, it didn't stop the J6ers. The J6ers busted into Congress and did all kinds of damage because they knew that their leader would pardon them. That's exactly what's happened. So
Yeah.
we have to take a page out of their playbook and say, all right, what can we do to really make them, like, how do we stop this?
I think also
You
if you think back to
resist.
the COVID strikes, I mean, when people were literally going to their state capitals where they weren't, trying to murder or gallows people like in the J6ers, but they made it so obstreperous in their state houses that you started seeing the peel back, and even now that pressure against masks because they were just up in their legislators' space making protest, having signs, being loud and saying, we don't want this. And I think if you want to preserve free speech as much as those people wanted to endanger public health, then we have those options. And also I will in the show notes, and I'll also do a little add-on in the audio as a separate clip in here to list the phone numbers for the Oklahoma State legislature to
Yes.
call, as well as list a website where you can at least find and look up your own state representatives if you want to ensure where you're living doesn't start to mimic that or puts in preventions or protections for your free speech as well. I will say that my
And they,
mom was an executive assistant for the governor's chief of staff in Maryland. Calling is much more effective. Again, you don't have to swear. Please don't be rude, but you need to call and politely say, this is what concerns me. This is why I'm upset. This is an issue that I think you could split it up, or the options you also gave to be polite but firm. And it's so much harder for them to ignore it than a tweet, than an email, than even a physical letter. Like my mom said, sometimes it would take them 3 or 4 weeks to go through the physical mail, and they would get complaints about the snow's blocking my driveway. And by the time they read it, it was March and the snow had melted. So if you
right.
want that action, if you can call them, call politely. If you can go over and actually are in a state capital or in the place where your representative's office is within your county, go politely, because it is harder to ignore a physical voice that ties up the phone lines, or someone who's literally come and say, I'm a constituent, I pay taxes, I am worried about this.
The other thing too, and I want to just put a little amendment to my protest and resist. The First Amendment also covers the Americans' right to peaceably protest. You don't have to destroy property. You don't have to go out and threaten people's lives. As a matter of fact, if you do that, you are definitely going to get arrested. But if you are just trying to enter a public building that you have every right to be there and have access, and you get arrested for that, and it just so happens to be on NBC News, I can't see how anybody can ignore that. I mean, Martin Luther King, Gandhi, the nonviolent protests are very effective if you bring things to a standstill. So create a human ring around a building, go in and sit in on your state legislators while they are talking about these bills.
Yes, going to
There's a
hearings
lot.
is very effective, and being in that gallery and being a representative, this is who you're going to affect in person, is very
Yeah,
clutch. It's
go to
very
their
important.
office. They don't want anybody to show up at their office. They're going to make it as difficult as possible to get there, but you do have certain rights. Don't break the law, but go where you should have public access and protest it.
Peaceably
Resist.
assemble.
Hold the line. Don't listen to the government. Don't believe when he tells you you have to resign from your government job. Like, he does not know how our government works. He proved that after 2016 during the transition, and I doubt he knows how the government works any better than that. Michael Lewis's Fifth Risk book lays that out clear as a bell. That'll also give you nightmares. Don't read it before bed. But
He's the one who also wrote the book that I can't remember it. The one that explored the financial crisis. He did all of those
The
different
Big
ones, didn't he?
Short.
That's it.
The
That's
Big
him.
Short, and it's just Michael Lewis has a fantastic way of narrative nonfiction where he brings facts into a story. He tells you a story and he explains how it happened, and you're just like, yeah, I see exactly how this happened. Freakonomics was on the banned books list because it talks about similar things about how financial things are manipulated. Like, I would say, read up on some of these things. Don't just take my word for it. Go read the bill for yourself. Try to find a second source for things. There's a reason that I have 2 hard copies of the Constitution. I was concerned that when the leaders of this government stopped talking about certain things and shut down some websites and aren't putting out information on health risks, that the Constitution that's online wouldn't necessarily reflect what it really is. So be informed and find out what that means to you at home and what you can do about it. Again, there's more of us than there are of them. They only have power because we put the power in their hands.
Thank you. So my last question, or as we sum up, because Zoom will cut us off, is you've been talking about how we support stopping this bill, how we put pressure in Oklahoma, put pressure on our state legislators, how we become educated citizens. Since you're also someone who's been kind enough to speak with us and to help educate us on this bill, what can our listeners also help do to support you and support some of your advocacy work or just some of your fiction?
Listen, I don't think let me back up. Maybe my little spicy romance novels will change the world. Who knows? But the way you support someone is buy their books, digital, physical copy, what have you. I have Patreon. You can support me that way. If you don't want to buy my books, but you do want to support my message, you can certainly follow me on social media, YouTube. I'm on all the platforms. And look, if I knew this thing was going to be so big, I wouldn't have shot that video in my bathroom. I didn't intend for it to go viral. And I had sat on the information for a few days because I didn't really want to stir up the pot. But my heart told me I needed to say something now because my spidey sense is telling me that this is going to be a big problem. And so I would say, get out there, share the message, spread the word, share the video. It's fine. I know I look like a hot mess in my bathroom. It's fine. Go ahead and share the video and buy books because money talks.
It does. Also,
And
not only do
when
you
they,
support authors, but you want to be able to honestly do it while they're available and make sure you can keep
well,
having
they're
them
still
available.
available. And
Yeah, no,
I've
that's
also
where we are.
said buy hard copies
Me
because
too.
if they go after Amazon, which Amazon would be included in this ban, they may pull Kindle Unlimited, they may pull ebooks and
Audible, you're licensed to listen to these things is
Audible.
what you bought, not the books
Yeah.
themselves.
So if you really like a book, get the hard copy of it.
Dead tree.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Dawn. We really
Thank you for having me.
appreciate you and we appreciate what you're doing to raise awareness for all of this. We are very happy to be talking about and trying to help save books because we love books. So we'll see you guys next time on Other Lands Editing. Thank you for joining the Otherlands Editing Podcast. Look for our next episode coming soon. And in the interim, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Also, if you want more information or want to connect, you can find Margaret Bates and Midnight Voss at our site, Otherlands Editing. Until next time, keep writing and keep refining your words.